Call the City Council work session order. Clerk, please call the roll.
Here.
Here. Here.
Here.
He's excused.
Here.
Here. We have a few items, so we'll get right to it. Mr. Pastu.
Thank you, Your Honor. First item we have tonight, Mr. Cochran is going to go through the National Park Battlefield Protection Plan. We did receive a grant for that a couple years ago, and they're finishing up a lot of the work on that. So I'll have Mark and lead it off for us.
Thank you, Vince. Mayor, Council, good evening. We've got two presentations related to the battlefield this evening. The first one, as Vince mentioned, is the Cooperative Land Management Plan for the Frenchtown Unit. The Cooperative Land Management Plan, the purpose of that is to guide the political jurisdictions with units of historical significance for the national park on how to cooperatively manage those units and to preserve those for visitor access and preservation and interpretation. So a lot of the work that we've been doing over the past year has focused on 4 of the priority areas. But the study that you're seeing a draft of tonight, or a presentation on the draft of tonight, is going to be a very general overview to give you an idea of what the entire study contains, and then there's going to be some further action steps that will be described further in the presentation on where we go from here with the items. But the study that we got back from Quinn Evans Architects includes the existing zoning and regulatory context of each of the Priority 1 units, the current land use regulations for each of the units, the gaps that need to be addressed to ensure preservation and visitor access for those units, and then they also provided us with draft tools to unify preservation, protection, and the management of lands throughout all the political jurisdictions to promote the appropriate development of each. So this document is one that's required by the National Park Service for all units, and the one that we focused on today, or this year, were the 4 priority units that were Springwells up in Detroit, Hall's Trace, which is up in Brownstown and Berlin Townships, the Frenchtown Unit, which is in the city, and the Brownstown Unit, which is in Brownstown, Grosse Ile, Gibraltar, and Trenton. We also worked with the native tribes on this too. As Vince mentioned, we received a grant from the National Park Service American Battlefield Protection Program in 2014 to implement this study. Last year, we contracted with Quinn Evans Architects, and the work plan that kind of takes us through the next steps after the first draft includes the public engagement strategy, of which we're executing the first tonight. So we invited partners and engaged stakeholders for all of the Frenchtown Unit, including the city. The City Council and Planning Commission all received an invitation. The county, the Board of Commissioners, and the Planning Commission all received an invitation to take part and give them a heads up of what we'll be approaching them with in the future, as well as the Michigan DNR and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for the lands that they have in relation to the Frenchtown Unit, including Sterling State Park and Plum Creek, as well as Fish and Wildlife Service property near the Ford plant. We also invited Frenchtown Township and Monroe Township as well for the first presentation. So that's kind of an overview of the document. Any questions so far of what it is?
Don't see any.
Okay. Then I will turn it over to Terry, and she can talk more about what the study results included. Terry?
Thanks, Mark. As Mark said, we've been working on this for a while now, and Quinn Evans essentially has assisted us in preparing the study in the format that's required by the National Park Service and by the American Battlefield Protection Program. And rather than go on and on about the specifics of what's in the document, I'll give you a general idea. I mean, it is hundreds and hundreds of pages. And what it's meant, as Mark said, to do is to provide some guidance as we move forward with talking with the different jurisdictions that are involved in order to look at coming up with a cooperative and collaborative management plan. So the first thing that makes up the analysis is the military terrain analysis. It's also called a KOCOA analysis. And I'll be talking just a little bit more about what exactly that includes. The KOCOA analysis links battle events to identifiable locations by relying on historical descriptions. And so that military analysis is only as complete as the materials that one can gain to make it complete. It's completely based on available resources. So in our case, given the nature and the timing of these battles, those resources are primarily descriptions that are made from the point of view of U.S. forces. And there is sadly little perspective directly from British or Canadian or tribal forces that were involved in the battles. The defining features of the battlefield landscape are identified for each of 5 aspects of that KOCOA analysis, and I'll mention those very briefly in just a moment. Defining features are any features mentioned in battle accounts or shown on historic maps that potentially can be located on the ground. For example, rivers or hills, the location of structures, fences. The analysis also organizes information around landscape characteristics, those features that define and characterize the landscape and give it a particular character that help us to understand its cultural value, including natural systems and features like the location that we have here on the river, for example, which is kind of a gross example of a landscape feature. The landscape analysis helps us assess the ability of the physical features of the landscape to convey its significance, and that capability is defined as integrity. As you can imagine, 200 years down the road from the battles, there isn't a whole lot of integrity left to the landscape as it's observed nowadays, but we can, in fact, put together, based on primary and secondary source documents, a lot of information that allow us to be fairly confident about the location of features within the landscape and the nature of the landscape itself. So the landscape analysis describes where integrity exists and where it's been lost to some degree due to both natural and man-made changes over time. So that essentially is the general makeup of any KOCOA analysis, not just the one that we're doing, but the ones for all the other units in our battlefield situation and for any National Park Service related battlefield in the country. The second part of the Quinn Evans study had to do with the analysis of existing zoning and land use regulations, and Mark already mentioned this. What that analysis does is to consider the relationship of current development and zoning. Oops, sorry about that. It considers the relationship of current development and zoning to the study and the application of study results, and defines issues that might arise in and around battlefields, such as the development of amenities, preservation of cultural and historical resources, and potential development or redevelopment. It includes considerations of factors in addition to zoning, like setback and screening requirements, parking and lighting standards. It is not meant to curtail development, but to ensure that future development is both efficient and effective for all of the constituents involved. The third portion of the study suggests strategies that we might use to educate, engage, and inform the public in these efforts and essentially make them a part of the entire process of coming up with a cooperative management agreement structure. So, KOCOA, very quickly, because it makes me crazy not to know what initials stand for in anything. It essentially describes the 5 areas that are under consideration during the military terrain analysis. So it analyzes key terrain. Key terrain is essentially any ground that gives a particular advantage, be it an advantage to an aggressor or an advantage to someone who's attempting to repel the aggression during the battle. And so obviously high ground, we come to think of high ground as a good thing to occupy during battles, and high ground areas would be potentially key terrain. In our case, we don't have a whole lot of high ground, but in our case, we do have a lot of open area, which in and of itself had a significant effect on the progression of the battles. O is for observation. The weather and terrain conditions that allow forces to see a variety of participants. So it may allow the aggressive force to see who it is that they're attacking. It may allow the defending forces to see who's coming at them. It may allow either forces to observe the activities of non-combatants. All of those things, and not just the topography of the terrain, but also conditions. In this case, as you all know, we had these battles in the winter, and so that in and of itself was significant in terms of how the battles progressed and where they went. Concealment is landscape that provides protection from observation and fire. Obstacles, obviously any obstruction that impedes movements, whether it be natural or man-made, like swamps, forests, walls, and ditches. And avenues, which are the natural paths of local transportation. And in this case, because we had a major military road that was constructed as part of these actions, that plays a significant role. The map is a little fuzzy, but you have packets, and all of these maps are in your packets along with additional information that gives you a little more full sense of the kinds of things that the study looked at. This is the result of the overlay of a number of maps from the KOCOA, and you'll see others in your packet that deal with vegetation, for example. This map summarizes the combined battlefield boundaries. We had two battles, the first battle and the second battle, and shows relationships to conditions that exist now of those battlefield boundaries. So you'll see the areas that are outlined in orange, yellow, and red. Those areas essentially describe not just the location of precise movements in the battle, but the overall movement of troops and pursuit back and forth across both of the battles. And therefore, those are areas that are of great interest to all of us in terms of recognizing them as potential historical assets and what we may be able to do with them. Okay? The overlays allow us to determine the battlefield core as well, although the boundaries are what are denoted on this, not in particular the core, but the national park occupies a portion of that battlefield core here. As a result of using these overlays, we have a better picture of what assets we have to work with, and a more in-depth knowledge of what took place that informs how we develop and enhance recreational and educational facilities and programs. This map identifies protection methods that existed at the time that the study was completed, which was last fall, and I know that there's been significant movement and work that's being done on part of the Planning and Zoning Commission to modify some of those things. But this was the protection methods existing at the time that the study was completed and superimposed with the battle core boundaries, battle boundaries, and parcels of interest. And those parcels of interest are parcels that may in fact be either developed or used in some other way that are contiguous with those battlefield boundaries. This kind of map allows us to identify what Mark was referring to as potential gaps. Gaps in existing regulations, all that means is that there is a possibility that there may be some issues in the future regarding development or other kinds of use considerations that have to do with the regulations that are in place and might be addressed more accurately with some changes. So what these are doing is allowing us to identify potential gaps in existing regulations that could be addressed to improve access, use, and preservation. And again, some of these are included in your packet handout. You have a list from the gap analysis that indicates the areas that we might want to take a look at. Again, this kind of map gives us a better understanding of the battlefield, and associated assets. And it helps us to develop a more comprehensive approach to land use and more sensitivity to the ways in which different types of land use definition can affect the success or the attractiveness of associated businesses, recreational and educational ventures. You may be aware of the fact that, for example, we've been working with a private individual who is interested in opening a business that is contiguous with some of these areas of interest, and that individual is going to be exploring timber frame building, which was a building technique that was used during that time period. And so it all fits together. Making the most of our assets, and that's what this is all about. How do we proceed to develop cooperative land management? There are a variety of tools that exist that both private and public partners can use to guarantee that our assets are used to best effect, providing quality experiences for businesses, developers, residents, and visitors. And these are some of the examples of different kinds of tools that we could look at, and some of them may already be in existence but just need tweaking. Others might be new ways for us to address the whole issue of cooperative management. No matter what tools we choose, we're all trying to achieve the same goal, which is to help provide some guidance for jurisdictions and for private individuals and developers for cooperative preservation, sustainable development, and operation of lands associated with the battles and their aftermath. So what happens from here? I've told you a little bit about what we have done, but from here on out, what we're interested in doing is encouraging both public and stakeholder participation to integrate local knowledge into planning policies and management, to encourage collaboration, to build agreement and support. And so, as the primary jurisdiction that we are dealing with when it comes to the Frenchtown Unit that we have studied, but also in conjunction with all the other jurisdictions that are represented here tonight and have been invited. What we'd like to do, not just with the City of Monroe, but with others as well, is to meet with staff and the appropriate commissions to discuss study findings and possible actions, to educate the community to the nature of the assets in their backyards on potential land use issues and the frameworks for decision-making, and to collect feedback from the community and incorporate it in formal actions and agreements that hopefully make the use of all of our assets as effective and as efficient as we can possibly make them. Does anybody have any questions?
I have a quick one.
Sure.
So looking at that with the integration and collaboration and next steps, do you have examples, or would examples be available of some of those agreements, how they might read and how it might apply
Absolutely.
to here that we could look at in the future?
One of the things that we asked Quinn Evans to do was to provide us with templates for a number of the tools. And so we have access to examples that will help inform us in moving forward with this kind of thing.
Excellent, thanks.
I think a good example of that, Mayor, is recently Council approved the Historic District Overlay. That is a tool that was identified in the study as an opportunity to work together to manage property that's significant to the battlefield, though it may not be owned by the battlefield. Because one of the messages we wanted to convey tonight is, while we're looking at the 4 Priority 1 area units and that the National Park has interest in, it doesn't mean that the National Park wants to own those, or the federal government doesn't want to own those, but they want to work together with the communities in which are represented, or the private property owners that are represented, on how we can preserve and protect those in the future. So Terry alluded to one of the things, of course, that we're working on right now is an update to the zoning ordinance. So we're looking with Jeff and the Planning Commission and others on the team with properties that are in the battlefield area. Is there a battlefield zoning district that we can apply to a certain area? And what are some of the regulations that we can look at in those ordinances to ensure that the significance of those lands are told and preserved for the future? So those are some of the tools and the things that we're looking at. This grant only covered the 4 priority units. Of course, there are other units that the National Park is interested in as they relate to the battles of the River Raisin. And so Scott and the National Park Service will be looking for additional funding on how they can fund the furtherance of the cooperative land management plan to include the rest of those units as well. So, any questions?
Other questions from council?
Okay.
Next, that's it? So I know
More to
there's you referred to the handouts, so make sure that some of the council may not have had them with them today, but opportunities to make sure they have that to review back. There may be follow-up questions that they can send to the city manager, and obviously have look forward to further discussions. Thank you. I know it's been a long time coming and a lot of hard work, so I appreciate all the efforts that are there. Thank you.
A very comprehensive document.
Good. Vince?
Mark, you want to move on to the next item?
Okay, the next item is the space analysis for the multi-sports complex. So previously, the city council had approved a temporary lease agreement with the National Park Foundation, the Battlefield Foundation, to move the administrative offices into the multi-sports complex. As part of that short-term lease agreement, it was in effect until the space analysis was completed. So we had initially identified the multi-sports complex as being the headquarters and the visitor center and the education center for the National Park Service, even back when the Heritage Corridor Plan was developed back in 2013, when ICE was still operational on the one half. And so last year, we started working with the Cooperative and the Battlefield Foundation, as well as the National Park Service, to do a space analysis on how the building could be reconfigured and compatible use for all the partners who were involved. At that time, of course, ICE operations was still ongoing, and so we were looking at the dry side of the multi-sports complex as well as the front atrium area for a visitor center. Of course, last year, ICE operations were shut down, and so the scope of the work that we had with the Collaborative moved to exploring the space at the entire multi-sports complex and looking at how that can be reused as the education visitor center as well as a community education center. So again, we worked with the Collaborative to conduct a space analysis on the multi-sports complex, but also at the same time, as we engaged all the stakeholders and heard about the space needs for each, we started thinking, is the multi-sports complex the best site? And so we opened up the scope to include an alternative site for the education center, which we'll go through this evening as well. So alternative one was the adaptive reuse of the multi-sports complex. Alternative two, we looked at the Monroe County Community Credit Union site on Winchester Street. You can see the arrow pointing in the Heritage Corridor as to where those two locations are and as described in 2013. And so the Collaborative, we held various meetings with the stakeholders, including the city, the Battlefield Foundation, the National Park Service, Parks and Recreation, others from the community, to hear about what the needs were for the building. And the next few slides that we're going to go through are the alternative one that the Collaborative came back with. This is the outside of the building and the entire site layout. You can see that the parking lot was rearranged more toward the north along Noble Avenue. The building, of course, is in the same spot. Bus parking was added to the west behind the building. And then in front of the building in this area was some more outdoor interpretive exhibits and educational experience on the outside when you're leading into the building. Projected costs were also part of the study, and so you can see for the entire site redesign, the cost would be just under $2 million. That includes the construction of the bus circulation and parking area, a new 200-car parking lot, the outdoor Native American exhibit space, as well as some infrastructure improvements that would be needed, new entries off of Noble, rerouting a little bit of the Mason Run drain to accommodate the moved parking lot to the north, as well as incorporating that into the outdoor exhibit area. So here you see, as we got more into it, and the Collaborative did a good job of hearing what the space needs were and then trying to fit them into the shell of the building as it is. And so they did end up phasing it. This is the first phase, which would start with the visitor center in the front. This would not just be a visitor center for the national park, but a visitor center for the entire region and all the amenities. Things such as Sterling State Park, the Detroit River International Wildlife Refuge, the the metro parks to the north as well as to the south, in kind of a dispatch area for all visitors to Monroe County, and where they can find more information about all of the different sites and amenities to do in the entire region. There would be the gift shop, as well as the front counter space. And then you would move in for phase one on the south side of the building would be the shell of the education center, middle school through adult, the theater, which would show the films that the national park is currently in production with the national filmmaker to tell the story, an introductory video for visitors to the national park. So the theater is a very important component to get up and running sooner rather than later in phase one. The restrooms would stay the same, and then there is an opportunity to move the city recreation offices as well as an indoor play area for preschool through elementary age children that would be incorporated with the city parks and rec space in the same area. The north side would be shelled out space for eventual future use. So phase one basically includes the shell of a middle school through adult education center, a theater, the visitor center, as well as the city recreation offices and the exploratorium for the younger kids. Phase two would expand a couple of the different areas. Of course, the visitor center, there would need to be some further upgrades to the front of the building. The city recreation offices and exploratorium would remain, as well as the full build out of the entire education center, including archives, some storage on the first floor, and flowing through mostly the western portion of the building. This area would be opened up for a theater, but also for the cafe and the meeting area, as well as 3 multi-purpose rooms toward the back with a kitchen and a service area and storage. The thing that's unique about this area is designed to be completely opened up into a multi-purpose area that could seat as many as 800 people with the walls completely open. The nice thing, the great amenity that this would provide is currently there's not a space in Monroe County to house that many people, along with a full service kitchen and a servery as well. And then phase one didn't include any upgrades to the administrative office suites. Of course, this would provide the administrative offices for the National Park as well as the Battlefield Foundation on the second floor. Minimal changes and redesign that would need to be accomplished upstairs. So for the indoor construction costs, phase one, which would just be the southern portion of the education center, as well as the theater, the visitor center, and the parks and rec space, would be about $2.3 million. A full build out that would go up to phase two would be a total of about $8.5 million. It's important to note that this doesn't include exhibits. This is just the construction costs. For any exterior facade improvements, we kind of looked at 2 different options. The first being the low end, which would be the drive it or painting on the outside, to the high end, which would be the metal panels and concealed fastener metal panels on the outside. Total project cost for the low end for the outside facade improvements would be about $632,500. And that would include the front facade and the angular walls on phase one. Phase two would be the remainder of the building, and then phase three would be building enhancements at the entry to the visitor center. The high end, which would be the different materials with the concealed fastener metal panels, could be about $902,500 for the outside. So the total cost for the multi-sports complex repurpose, including the site improvements, phase one, phase two, and the building facade, would be just under $14 million at 13.8. Again, that doesn't include the indoor or the outdoor exhibition costs. So then we did look at the alternative with the credit union site on the south side of the river. That would include property acquisition on the block as well as acquiring the credit union property, demolishing and doing site prep. And it would also result in a smaller education and visitor center. So it would be about 72% of the size of the multi-sports building. It would include the visitor center, the offices, the cafe, the food court, and the theater, but it would not include the Parks and Rec office space or the recreational area. And there's what a draft site layout would be. So you can see it would use part of the existing credit union building, as well as an additional add-on, some site improvements, the bus circulation, the parking, about 140 spaces for visitor parking, as well as the property acquisition that would have to take place. Some additional features along the riverfront, such as an overlook and then the Peace Garden as well. So roughly the cost of demolition and construction of a new visitor center on the credit union site would be about $18,375,000. So what happens from here? This is the result of the study from the Cooperative, and so we're bringing this to you tonight to get feedback on what you've seen so far. Of course, there would be fundraising that would have to take place before any construction is done. So with that, we'll open it up for questions. And Terry and Scott, feel free to jump up and assist.
I'll see, Vince, you have a comment first?
Just the one thing I want to add, it was very good working with the Cooperative through this project. I will tell you, my first impulse early on was we were trying to jam, a lot of stuff into the multi-sports complex, and I had some reservations. And candidly, when we looked at, where the credit union site is south of the river there, it became more costly in a smaller area. But I think they did a wonderful job of looking at long-term, the site layout, the visitor experience, and utilizing the building in its unique layout as an ice arena for the purpose of National Park Visitor and Education Center. So they were really good to work with. And the other part of it is, and maybe we'll have a little more time to talk about it, is the phasing actually can move this along quicker than, you see the big 14 million number or 13.8, and, you don't have to take that bite all at once. There's a ways to get there that make it a little more palatable. So that was the other part, is I think that they were very good in giving that consideration as well, so.
Even the phases could be phased. So phase one, we could do that in pieces. It doesn't mean that all of phase one has to be completed all at once either.
Yeah. And for example, this is a good site plan here. Think in terms of, the large costs that went with the everything there on the site. Well, you may very well live with the parking lot for starters, and that can be, functionally serviceable until you're successful with other fundraising and donations for some of the other improvements. And so that was the thing that was very good working with them, is there's ways to get this up and running much quicker.
Yeah.
Could I add?
Yeah.
If I could add just a couple of things. The Cooperative sent a team of 7 engineers to go through the existing building, and so the figures that you see are all based on a really good working knowledge of exactly what they have to work with, what systems are going to have to be replaced, what kinds of major changes might have to happen to the HVAC system, for example. So all of that's been taken into consideration in these very general granted figures. I think another really important thing to note is that and one of the things that I thought was really cool was the children's recreation area that would be part of the Parks and Rec area would be contiguous with the rest of the overall education center offering, and themed to the kinds of things that we'll be doing in the education center. So it would all tie together, which I think is really fun and really exciting.
Let's see if there's questions from council. Brian?
Thank you, Your Honor. In terms of going back to the era, building types, et cetera, are we thinking of any kind of plan for those on the battlefield site prior to this coming to fruition? Or what's the timeline when it comes to those types of things?
Historic Frenchtown, is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
Historic Frenchtown is something that actually has been on all of our minds very recently. So there certainly is a possibility that we could look at starting development on that, but nothing at the moment is set in concrete. So it's a really good thing to bring up, though, because we've experienced a great deal of success in property acquisition. Historic Frenchtown may be available to us, at least in terms of the available geography, much sooner than any of us expected, I think.
Yeah, I think with Historic Frenchtown, of course, according to the Heritage Corridor Plan, the majority of it is set to be built along Elm Avenue, where the current visitor center is, as well as some of the residential houses that we've been acquiring through the DNR Trust Fund grant. And so I think the first priority that we've all been focusing on is how do we move operations from the current visitor center, which is severely lacking in adequate space for education and operations, into the multi-sports complex, as well as continuing to implement the DNR Trust Fund grant so that we can move forward with not only the repurpose of the multi-sports complex, but also historic Frenchtown.
Okay, so basically what you're saying is you're trying to do them and incorporate them all at the same time rather than putting one in before the other, or?
No, the Heritage
We're
Corridor
not certain of
Plan
that.
was designed to be implemented in phases, and so that's always in the back of our mind, historic Frenchtown, but for the purposes of the multi-sports complex, it's to set up the visitor and the education center as quickly as possible, so that when people come to the national park, at least they've got the education center to visit while we're trying to figure out the plan for historic Frenchtown in the future as well. Yep.
Councilman Lamore, we're excited that the DNR Trust Fund grant's moving forward. We do have to tear down the visitor center before we can obviously reconstruct historic Frenchtown, so that's one of the buildings that has to come out along with some of the houses that the DNR Trust Fund grants has acquired or is working on acquiring from willing sellers. The other piece is we have a team that is working on the concept for historic Frenchtown, so it is moving along, sort of simultaneously. The highest priority for the historic Frenchtown was the land acquisition, so that was sort of phase one, which, as Terry alluded to, is moving faster, quite frankly, than we anticipated that it might, which is good news. And so the team that's working on the concept designs will come back and present those to council, hopefully sometime in the near future for you all to see and comment on and view. And then once there's an agreeance with council on that and the public, then fundraising would occur for that. But right now we're focusing on the fundraising as associated with the education center.
Just a comment, because we've worked, as the city's worked on this for years, and it's a process that at times seems slow, and yet things are being done. The DNR Trust Fund did provide the revenue to move forward. And as you look at the quarter plan, in each of those sections were there because they all had different functions that looked at in the future, but also it was recognized early on that there may be different revenue sources that would develop one area but not the other. And it's interesting because it's pretty fluid. One thing you think is going to step off first, and then revenue, as was mentioned, the sale and purchase of properties are moving more rapidly. But at the same time, you want to have a visitor center, and then at the same time, you want to have the greenway space, and things are moving there. When we talk about some of the rail crossings and safety issues and items that are opportunity to prevent that, open those as properties were purchased. There's other, I guess we'll get to a question here soon, but so it kind of moves back and forth, and I don't think that anyone's trying to outrace the other. It's really how the planning comes through, the opportunities for the funding that's available, and what funding's in the future, which is my question. So we all know that funding's going to be needed in the investment of the city as well. Some of the thoughts on future revenues that may be available. I know that we we've always tried for a FEMA grant, and that's going to come yet a year later, but that's okay because it's still opportunities for the properties that fall there. And we currently still have the DNR Trust Fund grant.
Yeah, we've got the DNR Trust Fund grant. The Battlefield Foundation also received the appropriation from the DNR as well that goes toward the Education and Visitor Center project. Of course, we're continuing to explore different grant opportunities. You mentioned the FEMA. We received a lot of really good feedback from the state on our application for that. Of course, unfortunately, we didn't receive that this go around, but we were encouraged to submit again for that in the future, as well as future grant funding from the DNR as well. So
It wasn't because of deficiency of the application or the strength of it, but it was some of the prioritization at the time for FEMA from a national perspective is just being directed elsewhere. But it's still a great submission. Okay.
And if I might add, though, through this experience, I think we've gotten a lot better at figuring out these grant programs and leveraging them one against each other and the land acquisition process. And so, you know, we, from a strategy standpoint, realize what we can do with the FEMA grant and the DNR grant simultaneously to minimize that local match that would be required for that. So, you know, and again, I think part of it is here in the last year is that there had been a lot of discussion, and now that actually things are happening, the credibility of the project in the community that's affected has really been enhanced. And, you know, I know Mark periodically gets inquiries from folks that heretofore probably were not interested. Now they know this is genuinely a reality, and we can pursue those going forward with the additional state and federal funds.
state federal funds as well as different fundraising opportunities that are identified as they come along as well.
Other questions for Mark on this? I know that they're kind of digesting all this, plus the presentation. There may be comments in the future. Obviously, feel free to contact the manager, and if he gets some additional information for us, or if maybe Mark and others come back if there's specific items.
The other thing, if I could just add to it a little bit about the Parks and Rec element of it, again, you know, certainly, you know, working with Scott and the foundation, very comfortable having them out there as well, and with the administrative offices. I will also tell you that the one thing that, particularly this time of the year when the recreation program registrations go on, it's not the most convenient or customer-friendly experience for folks to come up to the second floor. Parking downtown is not necessarily that easy. In the future, we think it would be a much more convenient way for folks to come in and handle their registration than what our current process is up here on the second floor. And it's no indictment with the Parks and Rec folks. They just got a very limited space to function and operate. And so this, I think, would work a lot better.
The strength of this as well, if I may, that the Cooperative did as well, is other tenants that we may identify outside the Battlefield and the Battlefield Foundation who may find it beneficial to be housed in this space as well as we look to grow the tourism industry of Monroe. So is there other opportunities for rent out of office space or other partnerships for offices in the former multi-sports complex too?
If I may, is it too early to talk a little bit about the ITC tower relocation?
No.
Okay, can we go back up to the broader site map? And part of it is what I really want to do is stress some of the significance of actually having a plan like this, because you know, a large utility like ITC was contemplating replacing a lot of their towers along East Elm Street, and the fact that we had this plan gave thought to how else we might be able to accommodate that. So, Mark, I'll let you give them give council where an update is.
Yeah, it was 2 months ago or so, I believe. I came to council and brought to you the proposal from ITC, or their plan, to reroute the Custer line that runs from their substation at Maple up Noble, down Dixie Highway, and then continues east out to the DTE plant. And so we've had a lot of conversations with them about how the reroute of the Custer line and the rebuild in their poles would impact the long-term plan and the long-term vision for this area. And so Scott and I have been meeting quite a bit with ITC, sending them a lot of maps, a lot of different proposals on how Their plans for the Custer line could also be complementary for the city's long-term vision for this area as well. And so we've got a few different proposals that we've sent them. They've been very cooperational, I guess I could say, with the city in terms of seeing those proposals. And right now they're working with their design team. Just talked to them today about how the reroute of their lines can be most efficient as well as complementary to our project. So nothing final yet, but it's been a good project. And as Vince mentioned, it's because we have a vision like this in place that we can have these conversations for other stakeholder and other partner long-term projects in the area as well. As well as with the DNR, I think we can talk about the Heritage Corridor or the Heritage Trail with the deficiencies that are in place from the national park going into the state park. Of course, there's crumbling areas of it. And so we've been engaged in discussions with them as well on how we can improve that as we seek to develop and strengthen the Heritage Corridor. A lot of synergy, I could say.
Again, I want to echo Mark's sentiments with ITC, their willingness to work with us and try and find solutions. We're not at the end, but they've really worked hard to try and accomplish what they need to as a corporation, but also recognizing the value associated with this Heritage Corridor plan and how they can be a part of making it work. So.
And we do have to give them a little bit of credit because it's slowing their project down.
It is,
so the fact that they're delaying a little bit to work with us, I think, speaks to a lot with them as well.
Yeah, if we get the one that I think is our favorite, you'll be very pleased with how that works out. It's a good layout. So.
Good. If there's no other questions, I know there's a couple other items. Definitely want to get to the next one. It's on the agenda. I think you have some presentation people here to give that. So, Vince?
All right. Next item is 911 surcharge. Mark? Part of it is, I believe it's, Mark will give us a little details on what's proposed on the August ballot related to that.
Yep, good evening. Mark Gramlich, Director of Monroe County Central Dispatch. I just have a PowerPoint I'd like to refer to as we're going through this, so let me get this logged in real quick.
Mark? Cochran.
The other Mark.
You could help him. Or he's got it. He's fine.
I want to make sure it goes to PowerPoint. Yep. Okay, and then just arrow over.
Yep.
Okay. So, looking at the surcharge needs for Monroe County, we looked at our stakeholders with Central Dispatch. As you know, in 1997, the county decided to have a central dispatch instead of separate dispatch centers. It was a benefit for Central Dispatch. Of course, there was a benefit for Monroe City. The benefit for Monroe City was they didn't have to purchase any more of the equipment involved with dispatching and take on that staffing responsibility. The benefit for us as a county, when we put all of our resources in one room, it makes it a lot easier to look at what we have available countywide, not just in each area. And while Oakland and Wayne counties are good examples of counties that have several small agencies, they're working harder to collaborate. Last week I was at a meeting. Oakland County is down from 36 dispatch centers to 18. So when we look at this, I view Monroe City as a large stakeholder. You have the second largest police department we dispatch for, and obviously you have a full-time fire department here. So there was a few things that came out after the Board of Commissioners approved this, and why I'm here tonight, and I'd like to come back in June or July, and we'll have a quick video we'd like to play for you, but why I'm here tonight is I want to bring to your attention what we're trying to do with the surcharge. So I try to keep a 5-year plan up to date every year. We try to look at what technology is going to change, what we have in-house. I don't know if any of you have been out to Central Dispatch. I know I've been the director since 16. I'm here tonight also to invite you out to come and see Central Dispatch. I'm available. I do travel quite a bit, but I'm available by appointment, and I'd like to bring you through and show you. But so we looked at our 5-year assessment need, and the 911 board asked me to identify what those needs were going to be and what those costs were going to be. So when we prioritized these, this was October, November of last year, And in just the 5 to 6 months, I'm going to tell you it's changed a little bit because of technology. So the 911 District Board that I report to, they voted unanimously to move it to the Board of Commissioners. We worked with the Board of Commissioners, and on February 20th, it was adopted to take to the August 7th ballot. So when we look at this, you're going to see it's a short, mid, and a long-term need, but I'm going to give you a few of the changes. So Central Dispatch is made up of 24 employees. That counts myself and an assistant director. We work with central office of the county on finance matters, but we still handle our own internal payroll. Some of the localized bill pay we take care of. And then after that, we have 6 supervisors and 16 dispatchers. We dedicate 1 dispatcher every day to the Monroe City Police Desk. We man that desk exclusively for Monroe City. So we have about 115,000 911 calls that come in each year. I didn't put any of these in the slide, and that'll be part of the video we bring back. I just want to give you a little bit of overview of it. So we have 115,000 911 calls. We have at least that many, or we anticipate more administrative calls. So we're averaging about 230,000 phone calls. And then throughout the course of the year, we count how many times a radio is clicked. So whether it's an officer calling into dispatch or us calling out to an officer, and that's just short of 2 million times a year. So with 22 staff members, we work 11 on each platoon. We staff typically 5. We have 6 during the busy part of the day, and then we go back to 5 at night. So what we're looking at trying to do, and when we identified this as a short-term need, our call volume is growing. In 2009, we were only handling about 60,000 911 calls. So from 2009 to today, it's almost doubled. We believe that's from technology. Cell phones have become almost prevalent to everybody, where 91% of our calls coming in are from a wireless device. The 9% that we're seeing from landlines are typically from businesses. There's not many landlines left. But when we looked at this, we're going to be bringing in text to 911 later this year in Monroe County. We looked at adding a supervisor that can work in the room as a supervisor and that can work as an IT staff for about 20 hours a week. And what that'll do is I'm removed from the room. I was a dispatcher, a supervisor, assistant director. So I can go back in the room. I've cut my certifications, but obviously as a director, that's not ideal, and I'm not always there to do that. And the assistant director also followed that same path. So while we can go in and we can help out, that technology is moving so fast, if you don't work with it daily or weekly, it gets past you. So we're looking at adding a supervisor that can handle the problems that we see with technology and be able to do some one-on-one training. And we're also looking at adding 2 more specialists. The reason why we want to do that is as these call volumes are growing and we know text is coming, we see a need there. In 2010, the county had 27 employees within Central Dispatch. Like I said, today we only have 24. Our telephone system we know is going to be end of life in 2019. The telephone system lasts about 5 years. The last cost was $137,000. If we were to stay with the same vendor, we're anticipating $145,000. Our computer-aided dispatch was over $1 million on the initial purchase. We're currently looking at about $115,000 a year maintenance, and it'd be a little over $100,000 to bring it up to the latest version. Today's a prime example. We had issues with yesterday's weather, took out some power, took out our network. So while that network's down, our staff had to handwrite all the calls that came in for almost 8 hours today. Then when the CAD came back on, they had to input all of that information manually. In the next version that we're looking at, we would continue to work seamlessly. One of the problems we see with that, and it's more prevalent with the Sheriff Department than it is with the city, but if we don't get it back up by 3 o'clock and those deputies go off duty or those small municipalities go off duty, they don't have their complaint numbers, which obviously are tied to information or reports that go over to the prosecutor's office. So in the newer version of that, it would stay, and then when the network or the internet comes back on, it would immediately pick back up on its own. We wouldn't have to manually enter those. When we looked at our midterm, our radio consoles were $567,000 in 2013. We're anticipating that cost to be closer to $750,000 after 2021. The technology probably could last longer than that, but with anything else, if there's not an end of life to it, the technology company's not going to see any increases to what they're putting out there. We have 8 workstations. The furniture we're using is coming up on 20 years old. We moved it from our location in the jail out to our new dispatch building, and the estimated cost is $132,000 to replace those. Those desks allow the dispatcher to stand 12-hour shifts. The desk goes up, the desk goes down, offer several features so that they're not sitting for all 12 hours of their shift. And then this is where we've kind of changed things. I'm sure you've heard from Chief White and Chief McCormick. The radios that we're carrying in Monroe County were purchased in 2014. They are end of life at the end of this year. So while Motorola will make a best case scenario to try to replace any broken radios, it's not likely. We'd like to bring 800 megahertz fire paging to Monroe County. We currently use a VHF system. Those devices that we just purchased through grant funding in 2013 are already obsolete. So we're looking at trying to bring the 800 megahertz paging first. So that'll probably get moved as we work through this, because it's a need that the county's going to see another increased cost to maintain that VHF system. And of course, the portable radios are also costly, and the county-wide total is about 1,200. We believe we're going to need at least 1,000 to replace those. I say that we need 1,000. In 2004, we had $9 million. We had a large sum of grant money. We purchased extra radios. We're not looking to purchase extra radios. We're looking to just purchase enough and then maybe add some more. So we believe we could get by with about 1,000 radios. The surcharge allows for central dispatch to purchase that equipment, and that would take the burden off of the smaller municipalities in the city. So I just want to give you a little bit of an overview of our revenue. Under the 42-cent surcharge, we see about $757,000. The 2016 actual is a little down, and that's only because of the quarterly reporting on those. We've changed that since then, and we'll have a more accurate reflection when I get the 17 numbers back from county finance. But when we looked at this, we said, okay, $1.50 would sustain us. What would it take to get past that? So just a small sample size of where else we bring money in, but as you can see, that general fund transfer in is $1.1 million. So these are our projected numbers, and this is based on just status quo. If we didn't purchase any equipment and we just got by with what we have, this takes into consideration maintenance contracts that'll go up 3 to 5% per year. This takes into account union contracts that have a 1% increase built in through 2020, and we anticipate further. So you see that number goes from 1.2 million to 1.589. So it's steadily growing, and that's without adding in any cost for replacement of any technology. That's just staying status quo. We looked at other counties. We looked to see what they were doing. These counties were selected at random, but they have some tie to us. Obviously, you know, when you look at the population of Clinton County, it's half of what Monroe County is. But we tried to look at what they're doing to offset. You see, Berrien County has a mill and collects a surcharge. Calhoun County, I'm still not sure how, charged the agencies they dispatch for. And that's something we do not want to get into here in Monroe County. It just doesn't make fiscal sense to anybody. So Calhoun came up with a program where it charges the police and the fire that they dispatch for. Jackson County saw a surcharge increase in 2016. Lenawee County, our neighbors to the west, went from $1.58 to $3, and that passed 2/3 majority in a special election in May of 2016. And then you look at a county such as St. Clair. They take 60 cents, but they balance on the general fund such as we do. And then Saginaw increased theirs to $2.65 in 2013. And Washtenaw, we wanted to put that up there because the operational cost of Washtenaw is about 3 times more than what we're doing here. And the whole reason why they can take the 43-cent surcharge as one population, but the other is they also have a public safety millage, so they're taking money from both. We looked at surcharge versus millage. We didn't want to go anywhere near a millage. We wanted to keep this user-based. The surcharge is per device. It's not per call, it's per device. If you have a contracted phone, that cost is built into your monthly account. If you buy a prepaid phone, that is now a fee that the state charges. That's supposed to be comparable to the contracted phones. That number was just changed with Public Act 51 that passed. So we talked about what we would need 5 years from now without any of this extra technology. And we believe that that's about $1.65, $1.70. But when we started looking at what the cost of technology will be, it could be up to $3.5 million every 10 years to just replace what we have. So we looked at setting a surcharge where you only go to the voters once, you ask for this surcharge, and we believe this will get us through at least 10 years. There is some discussion out there about the sunset of the surcharge in 2021. I can tell you that we're working on it as a directors association in the state of Michigan. We're working on it at the state 911 office, and we're seeing if there's any way we can move that sunset date out, or it'll become something we'll have to tackle then. And we believe that the legislation is going to be looking for some type of consolidation. I think Monroe's in good shape. We have just over 150,000 citizens, and that number they're throwing out is by 2025, any county with less than 100,000 they'd like to see consolidate. So we believe we'll be okay here. But that $2 number would get us through at least 10 years, we believe. So we looked at some timetables. This really not much for you here, but other than the one thing I want to point out is we waited till the August primary, which getting on the ballot is, that's a win for everybody involved. But if we would have held a special election and it were to be successful, such as Lenawee County did, we report that to the state by May 15th each year. They let the carriers know by June 1st, and then July 1st that starts. So that cycle runs July 1st to June 30th. So by waiting to the August primary, it just pushed us back 1 year from collecting the revenue. So if it is successful in August, we wouldn't see that revenue increase until July 1st of 19, and really we wouldn't see it until about the third quarter, which would bring us into 2020. I would like to come back and what we have tomorrow morning. There's a surcharge subcommittee. First Lieutenant Cuevas, the state police, he's the chairman of the 911 district board. He's overseeing the subcommittee. We've got some great people working with us. I know Michelle Pallett's here in the room. Bob Neely, if you're familiar with him, he's very involved in the county. We've got fire services involved. Chief McCormick's involved. Dr. Kuzno from ProMedica. So we're going to put together some talking points. We're going to put together some short videos. We're going to go to every township, village, and city meeting that we can. We're going to go to civic groups. Our whole premise here is to educate. I'm not here to advocate for it. I'm here to educate. We want to make sure that if the voters come to a body such as yours and ask questions, you can be informed or at least know where to send them. The biggest hurdle we face with anything else, and I'm sure you know this, is technology. The cost sometimes can be a set amount that we anticipate and we prepare for, and a year later we get to that point and they say, okay, well, technology's changed in the last 6 months, and that cost is now more or less. Unfortunately, it's been more as of late, but at some point it's got to plateau out a little bit. But the surcharge gives the voters an opportunity. I know Commissioner Morse here tonight. He was very instrumental in working to get this to the ballot. He's part of the 911 district board, and this is a benefit countywide. This allows for equipment to be purchased. It allows the county to take the next step to the platform we need to be for fire paging, and it also allows those fire departments who maybe don't have the funds to receive the equipment they need so we can move forward with that. So, do you have any questions?
Questions from council members? I have one. So I'll start here because you defined the surcharge. It was like like a unit. You mean like cell phones?
Yeah,
Or?
per any device that can. The way it's worded is any device that's capable of making a phone call. So if you have on your account, and people have asked me this question. Okay, I've got 3 phones and I've got a tablet or an iPad. If that tablet or that iPad does not have a phone number assigned to it, it's not levied the surcharge. If it has a phone number assigned to it, then it does, because it's capable of making a phone call.
So, resident that here, but they're, how do they, is it through the billings?
Billing address. Yep. it's
Billing
the
address.
Billing address. So if your billing address is in Monroe County, somebody approached me last week and said, well, I live in Monroe County, but my phone's on my daughter's plan in Grand Rapids.
Correct.
Well, unfortunately, that revenue goes to Grand Rapids. It's based on billing. And the other part I want to bring up there is sometimes when businesses, and obviously the city of Monroe would fall under this, they hear a surcharge increase. The way the surcharge works is it's charged per device, but on businesses, it's charged per line. So you don't pay the full surcharge. If you have 500 lines, you don't pay the surcharge 500 times. You pay the surcharge, I believe, in these numbers, I know I got to go back and pull the exacts, but like your first 10 lines are billed the surcharge, then 11 through 99's billed a discounted rate, and after that, I believe there's minimal or no fee on them.
I know we all call people that are different area codes, and just because it's outside the area, if their address is local, then it gets
Correct.
charged.
Yeah. My wife came from Oakland County. She kept her 248 area code, but our bill is in Monroe County, so we pay the 42 cents.
Helps define where the
Yeah.
revenue comes from and why some may not see it potentially, but I would assume that they might have a surcharge elsewhere though, too.
And that's the other issue is some people said, well, I'll go to a prepaid mobile like a Boost. The state recognized that those phones were never really thought of when the funding mechanism was put into place. So Public Act 51, Senate Bill 400 that was just passed and goes into effect, I believe, May 2nd. They took into account that those phones that you can buy the minutes or the cubes for, they have to charge more on the initial purchase to make up the difference in the cost compared to a contracted phone through a Verizon or a Sprint.
Look forward to the next presentation as well. I don't know if there's any other comments from council.
I want to thank you for your time tonight, and
Hey, Mark.
we want to come back. I know I wanted to get in here tonight. I just want to say this. I wanted to get in here tonight because, like I said, the Monroe City is our second largest stakeholder next to the Sheriff Department. I wanted to clarify any misconceptions that are out there. I know we want to come back. The other thing is the vote's not till August 7th, so we're trying to time this a little bit so we can get to each of these entities a little closer to the vote. It'll help maybe with any questions people have down the road. But again, I'm available. Please call me or email me. If you go to the county website, my information's on there, and I'm happy to tour anybody through the dispatch center to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you much. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Since it's about 6 after, so about 9 more minutes. So
I'll go through it fairly quickly. I actually was, I've been talking for the last month and maybe proposing some charter amendments for the August primary. I don't think we have enough time. We would have to have the council adopt them at the next meeting in order to get that to the Attorney General office and the Governor's office for their review. I may look to do that at the November election, but two of them would involve one. Jeff Green had worked in some language related to get the lighting back
he's
on.
leaning on the lights. You turn them off. Thank
There
you.
we go. Related to the timing with the capital improvements adoption, we got a very specific third week of February we're supposed to adopt, and we want to have a little more flexible language with that to correspond in some ways with the construction season for our engineering department. And then part of it is and I've had a conversation with some council, we have what I would call structural compression of our budget process. Now, one of them is very understandable, and that's the millage that you need to adopt soon so that we can put it on the May tax bill. And I wouldn't advocate at this point in time any change in that. But the fiscal year doesn't start until July 1st, and I know that there's been some outstanding items that we've discussed, and maybe we'll contemplate, maybe looking at that schedule so there isn't, you're receiving a proposed budget from the city manager on March 26th, and 3 weeks later I'm asking you to adopt everything. but there is a, what I would say, a structural compression that goes with that. Part of it is the biggest revenue source. We don't know what the final numbers look like until sometime in early March, and so that always is a driver. And the other part of it is I don't necessarily think we're going to be looking at a whole lot of millage reductions in the near future, but it's one of those things I think we could talk a little bit more about related to that hopefully in the summer when we would have to get it for the November ballot. But I do feel bad because it does put the council under a short period to go through the budget. The other item, can I talk a little bit about?
Sure, yeah, well, just on the charter amendments, I know there was a few that we were able to, I'll just say resolve through ordinance and stuff, but there were a couple others that were sent along that hopefully will be considered as well. One, of course, some of the regulations in our charter talks about the ability and age to run for office and some other voting items that I hope we can put on there I'm not sure why it's 25 because we're not 1910 anymore, but some things like that to get our engagement of people. I'm not even sure it's even legal, so just something we can clean up as well. So you got a couple minutes? Yeah, we have a few minutes left. Go ahead.
Yeah, the other item I just wanted to talk about is on tonight's agenda. Following the release of tonight's agenda, had a couple council members and even Mr. Sull and I were not exactly sure at the end of our meeting last Monday night how we were going to handle it. But what went out last Thursday, or Friday, I should say, had a public safety division personnel number that didn't include, the one additional position in police and the two firefighters. And the thought was, from the feedback I received, was those were all supposed to be in here with the adoption of the budget. And so the highlighted sheet that you have in front of you would incorporate that. It's an increase of $225,000, and then it would come out of the contingency line item, which is also highlighted as well. So based on some of the feedback that I received, that would be the change in the ordinance tonight. And then lastly, I put in front of you just a handout regarding the proposed public safety assessment schedule. I've just put together some details with it. I'll refine it a little bit, but I think at our next work session on May 7th, I would like to go through in detail with the council to discuss, the timing associated with it, as well as the scope of the study itself. And that's, again, part of the proposed budget that we do have funding in the fiscal 18-19 budget for that as well. So, and also it seemed, I think, as a condition of putting the positions back into the 18-19 budget. So that's, I think, in the interest of time, all I have for this moment.
We have about 4 minutes. If there's any questions for city manager on the items and the budget items that or I guess any of those topics, but of course the budget is on tonight's agenda following this. So I appreciate the review here from our conversations previously at the work session and council meetings regarding that item. So it is up for public hearing and second read and vote. See no other comments? I guess we're done. Okay, we'll close the work session and we'll start at